With a few G's, Lauren Hill.
In this video, we're going to look at that mastering phase in Logic Pro, and it's going to be aimed at beginners, people who are just learning how to do this. Maybe get your first tracks out, make them a little bit better sounding on SoundCloud and things like that. Perhaps your first forays into getting your own music out onto Spotify, you know, where the channel sponsor, DistroKid, who get your music out onto all those digital platforms, could really help you out. They do it at an amazing price that really helps out independent artists and gets them into all those major platforms they want to be on. I'm really looking to help you guys out with this video. So if you've got plenty of experience, you've got lots of knowledge behind working in Logic, you've put loads of tracks out, it's just not for you guys. I'm going to be going over some really basic concepts that you'll probably grasp and understand. So the first things first, what is mastering? Well, mastering essentially is that final stage, getting your mix ready for all platforms. It used to be a red book audio context. We're getting things ready for CD and vinyl. We don't have to worry about that so much now. We're more about adhering to the streaming platforms and what they need to get us the best digital performance. The other thing mastering looks to do is take a project and make it a sort of a whole. You see, all your tracks are made individually, and you'll probably notice when you listen to them, different discrepancies in volume, and the mix is slightly different. Mastering will look to bring a whole package together as well and have it so your EP or album all sounds like it's one key thing, all brought together in one scenario, right? We are going to go over some key things to do now. Now, instead of diving straight into Logic, we're going to go over some real basic things to start with that can help us out. So when we are nearing the end of our mix, what I'll personally do is I'll export my track and work on that individually, and that is what we'll do inside Logic. Rather than work everything on the mix bus, you can do that if you want to. The process I'm going to show you in Logic will still work, generally better practice, and you'll tend to get a better result, especially if you're doing an EP or an album, by exporting the tracks and bringing them into their own session. And that's the first thing we're going to look at with exporting our tracks and the sample rate and bit depth aspect of things. So we'll jump onto the Mac and have a quick look at that. What we'll do, we'll bring up a track that I have already mastered, and I'll just bring it up in Finder here. So what we do, we'll select this. We've got Honest Man, Bounce 2, 88.2, 24-bit.AF. What the hell do all those things mean? Right, let's break them down. So first things first, the sample rate. I've done this at 88.2, which as you can see is double 44.1, which we've got just above. Then we've got 24-bit, that's our dynamic range. So how much from low to high our track can bounce and how much detail is going to be captured there. AF file, it can be WAV or AF. I'm honestly not gonna go into that whole thing of one being better than the other. I'm on a Mac, Logic's always defaulted to AF. They always sound great. I've stuck with that. WAV or AF, gonna be fine. It needs to be a lossless audio format. That's what matters here. So when we go to export our track, we want it to be the highest possible quality. If your whole track has been recorded in 44.1 kilohertz and all your samples are in 44.1, and you push all your track together and then export in 44.1, it's going to be fine. However, there is something to be said for combining all those things together and then exporting at a much higher sample rate, 88.2 for example. The reason for this is you've got all these pieces of audio, they're all coming together to make a new thing. You're playing all different sounds at different timings. You can get a much better resolution using a higher sample rate than you would to use the native that everything was recorded in. So I'll usually work in 44.1. I find that completely fine for what I do, but I will usually export my mix into 88.1 to get a bigger, better result in terms of the clarity of the overall track. I hope that makes sense. Did a very quick explanation recently of the difference between your sample rate and your resolution and your dynamic range. Hopefully that will give you some clarity. I'll link it around here or down below. What we'll do, we'll open up the Honest Man project. Beautiful, so here's our tune. Most of it's going to be recorded in like 44.1. synths and things, obviously they're going to get rendered out. So what we want to do when we bounce it, we just hit Command and B. Firstly, destination, PCM, lossless format. That's what's important here. File format, WAV, keep it on AIF for me, just so everything's in that same old format. Use whatever one you want, I don't care. So resolution, we want to go 24-bit, okay? Now, for me, my music's usually not that dynamic. I mean, there's some quiet bits and there's some big loud bits where the drums are. Where this really comes into play is if you've got something that's really orchestral, goes into like really almost the quiet, like a whisper can be heard, like if a fly farted, you'd be able to hear it kind of thing, right? Then it goes really, really loud. That's where you need to have super high bit rate and really dial into that dynamic range over all of your track, right? However, I'm always going to do 24-bit because I can afford it in terms of storage, and it's going to give me that better dynamic clarity when it comes to the mastering stage, and it's going to go back to 16 anyway. I would go to 24-bit here. If you've done a super complex, ultra detailed orchestral recording, go for the 32-bit float. It's going to be flawless. You could reduce it by 60 dB and then normalize it and it would be the same as it ever was. It'd still cancel. 44.1, pretty much what I've been working in. We're going to double that up. Nyquist theorem, all that jazz, not going to dive into that. You can go watch a scientific video on it. When you click on it, you're going to get presented with all of those different formats. 88.2 is our doubling up option there. So we're going to do that. File being interleaved. Interleaved means woven into a stereo file rather than independent mono files. It's not what we're after here. And dithering. Okay. Dithering, we are not reducing down in quality, so dithering is not needed. That's all you ever need to know there. Dithering is not needed unless you are reducing down in quality. Then we want to get our whole track in there. That's perfect. You can do it in real time if you like. If you're going to do it in real time, then highlight, bounce a second cycle pass. I tend to do it offline. I think Logic does a really good job. I'm always going to do include audio tail. I can snip that off afterwards if needed. And normalize left us off. And then we would bounce that out. And that gives us the file we were looking at a moment ago. So here's our file. We can see the details of it. Overall duration, 8 minutes, 4 seconds, because there's going to be a large tail in there. 88.2 kilohertz at 24-bit. All right, when we set up our Logic project, we're going to go to audio. When we go into audio, we're going to bring that file in. Now we can very simply drag and drop it. And it's going to ask us a question. Change project sample rate to 88.2 kilohertz. Basically, it's telling you the audio file you bring in is higher than your normal settings in Logic. We want to do this and we want to change the project to fit that. So we're going to change project. We're going to hit import. But remember what I just said about dithering. If we were to convert the file, it would then take it from our 88.2 down to 44.1. And then we'd want dithering and other things to happen. We want the most high quality file. We want Logic to be running at this kind of level. It's another reason that I kind of work at 44.1 and then kind of upsample, if you will, for the final export and work just on this project. I can work at a much higher sample rate, much higher resolution, and completely hammer things. I can also bring multiple tracks into one session. Really useful for things like an EP or the album I'm currently working on. So let's import that as well, because we've got our audio markers and all that fun jazz. We're now going to start working on this in Logic. So we've imported our audio file. First thing I'm going to do is hit Z, and that's just going to zoom everything out, and we can see that long audio tail was left in there, right? Very first thing I'm going to do is just called a top and tail. All right, so I'm going to go to the start of the track and the end of the track and just make sure we're completely fine. Now the end of the track, I can just click up here, drag myself down to here till we get this little icon. I can just drag that back to where I want it to end. If I hold Option, use my mouse zoom, I can zoom left and right, zoom right into the start of the track, and there's just a little bit of the start, which is great. It fades in nicely. I'm just going to give it the tiniest little fade just to make sure there is no kind of pop or click as it all comes in. And then we'll do the same thing just on the end of the track here. If we just bring the marker, just bring the play marker right towards the end and then zoom in, we'll zoom into the play marker and we'll just give ourselves a little fade off at the end there as well. And we just want to play the end and make sure we're not cutting anything away. And there, you know, we are at 0 before we end up cutting it away. Now our project had all that extra bit in, this little gray arrow up here, we're just going to zip that along. And now when we press Z and everything, it's all zoomed in nicely and we can see our audio. Isn't that lovely? Right, so now let's focus actually looking at mastering this track and getting the best result out of it. Now there's a couple of things that I would set up inside Logic. If I'm doing it purely with Logic plugins, which we're going to in this case, the first thing I'm going to do is bring myself in a reference track. Because of the YouTube gods, I cannot put a commercial track in here and play it on YouTube. So I'm going to reference one of my own finished tracks. What I would recommend doing is having a good quality WAV file of a track that you love. I personally will recommend this a million times on the channel. I use Pendulum Plastic World over and over and over because it's just a flawless mix. The other one is still Dre from Dre 2001. I'm going to have to use one of my own tracks. I recommend just using something you love. We'll use the Feeling Heavy radio edit because I like that tune. So I'm going to drag that into the session as well. Bob, put that in there, right? Lovely. And look how slammed that is. That has been slammed in the master. It was analog master. I still think it sounds mint, but yeah, you can see the difference straight away, right? Now, if we were to play the two, Feeling Heavy is obviously going to be considerably louder. If you like a good visual indicator, use your inspector. So you can just press I to bring your inspector up, use your gain in here. Let's say we drop it 12 dB, we get a nice visual representation of it being dropped. Now, because all the transients are cut away, doesn't matter that much. But what we want is we want these to be roughly the same level. Now, if we solo this one, we can then hold control and we can switch the solo. And that gives us the option to reference between the two. We can listen to one, then listen to the other and get an idea for context of how close we are, right? So that allows us to just quickly switch back to a mix we know is really good. Like I said, I recommend you using a track you love, not referencing your own material purely for the YouTube gods. Just as a general workflow thing, I tend to put the reference at the top and I'm going to rename it as well, which can be useful in a moment, we'll see. So I'm just going to call that ref. The other thing I'll do now is just get sort of a plugin list going on my track. If I just press X, it's going to bring up the mixer for me. I've got ref on the left, I've got my track here. Real simple. Let's add the EQ by clicking here, add the compressor just by clicking here. There's a couple of other things that I want to use. So if we go down into our menu and we go into metering, I want to pick out the multimeter and I want to pick out the loudness meter. And actually just after the compressor as well, if we go into dynamics, I want to just get the standard limiter as well. We've got a whole bunch of things on there. Now, the reason I put them all on that channel, I don't want my metering to go on the stereo out because it will then be affected if we switch to our reference at any point. So the metering is always going to stay on this channel. I do actually want some metering on the reference channel and I want the multimeter to go over there. So I'm just going to hover over the multimeter, hold option and drag over. And now I've got a multimeter on the reference as well. Let's just close all these guys away. Okay, so something you can do with the multimeter that's quite nice and will give you a little visual guide to let you know you're in the ballpark is we open them both up, crop the tops away there. Now we can see the one at the top here is labeled ref, which is why we did that, just so we know it's the reference one straight away. My habit is anything that I'm working on, I keep over on the right hand side. You can obviously do whatever works for you. Naming them's always a good shout, making sure you're looking at the right thing. Now in detection, we're just going to leave it on mono. It basically does a sum to mono, and that's what gives us our analyzer. But if we need to specifically check out the left or right or left or right max, we can switch them over here. Fine, it's just fine on mono. It's also going to be fine on peak. If your computer can handle it, leave it on 63 bands. 31's okay, but 63 just gives you a little more detail to look at. Purpose of this is when we're listening between the two, at a glance, we can see now that side by side, they're not too far off, right? It just lets you know the kind of ballpark you're in. Now we can see that my current mix here is a lot more rounded around here when the snare pops up. This is a fair bit flatter. I mean, things are popping up all over the place, fair bit flatter. And especially the low end, right? You know, there's loads of low end in this track. In here, it's still there. There's some peaks, but it's just a bit flatter. So they're roughly close to each other. I mixed both the tunes. I'd expect them to be. But we can just get a quick guide of what's going on now. What may happen is something like this. Let's just do a kind of extreme option on our track. And there was loads of energy at 4K, wasn't there? Maybe you'll see something like this. And look, you know, you can hear there's a difference when you switch between your two tracks. You'll be like, okay, right, I can hear what's going on here, but I'm not sure what it is. Well, now you can look at the analyzer and go, right, okay. At 4K, there's loads of energy in the reference track, but I've got no energy there at all, really. And you can just see it at a glance. Now, I've done a ridiculous example of like a 24 dB cut, but it's so you can visually see it, and that's what it's there for. It's just to give you an idea to make sure you're hitting in all the right areas, okay? Now, you can switch this to 32 band, then it gives you a slightly different insight, especially on the low end. It can be useful. You can see my low end on here is going so much louder than over here. However, on our reference track, you can still hear the kick, you can still hear the bass when it's there. Yeah? Much lower. So we know that we can use that extra headroom and control that area. So don't mix with your eyes, but use it as a reference to find out the things you're hearing and where they are. Hope that's going to be really helpful for you. Okay, so from my perspective now, we're kind of ready to start the process of mastering. Now, I've just had a listen to the two back and forth there, and we've had a look at the analyzer. We know some things that maybe need changing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go into the EQ. I'm going to have a little sweep about with the EQ, and I'm going to close my meters now so they're not so much distracting me, and we can just focus on this. I just like to do a boost and sweep. I'm going to listen for some areas that maybe benefit of a boost. And I think we're going to be right up in the high end. I know we had lots of extra 2K on this track, and we can look at pulling that down as well. But this is so much brighter in our reference, even at lower level. So I think we could benefit even from a little lift like this, you know. Might be all it needs. Around here we can actually give it the tiniest of dips. When we use the shelf, now we can see our kicking snares right around here, sort of below the 200 region. You use a shelf just like this. Just take, I reckon, about 2 dB out on the bassy section here, and I'm going to be quite mean with the Q because I want to keep this area the same, but just drop the bass off. Also going to use the roll off, and I think we can safely, looking at it, bring that up to around 30, like that. Going to turn it off and on again just to hear what's going on with it. I think I can give us about 2 dB back on our reference. I'm steady, going up, I'm hitting the ground. Yeah, that's nicer. I think that's pretty good on the EQ side of things there. One thing I do here is got a really nice bass tone here, and to me that's going to be sort of the 300-400 region. It's a little bit here now. I don't just want to boost it. I think what we could maybe do is distort this whole track. So if we just go below the EQ here, go down to multi-effects, and we've got Fat FX. By default, it doesn't have like a blank preset, so we want to switch off bandpass, switch off distortion, switch off the XY, set the output back to 0, take limiting off, take the compressor off. I just want to use the bass enhancer. I'm going to push it all the way up to 150, which is its maximum, and we're going to roll in this warm amount on the bass. That's obviously way too much. We dial it back. That's just helping that stand out really nicely there. I like what we're doing with that. All right, now compressor, Platinum is going to do the best job for us, to be honest. It's going to be really, really clean. We're going to take auto gain off. We are going to go threshold all the way down. Ratio, honestly, probably about 1.5. I like to do low ratio and pull the threshold back a fair bit. Attack, I think that's going to be a bit quick for this track. Probably somewhere in the 20 kind of range. Release, honestly, probably somewhere in like the 80 odd range. Take auto off as well. Let's just dial that in a bit. I'm going to look to squeeze it somewhere between 3 and 5 dB. Now we're losing quite a bit of dynamic. So we're losing a bit of level, but there's still plenty of dynamic within that track, more than the reference, I'm sure. Now, it's squeezing about 3 dB. I'm only going to give it 2.5 back, because I think really that's going to be about the average. And then, sometimes it is taking out a little bit more, but I'd rather give it a little less gain, and we can work that again with limiting later and just have it nicely controlled there. Something I want to test as well is just coming into the main section, like how does that feel with the compression? That's nice. So we're getting like a nice push-pull with the kick. It's just gluing everything together really well. Honestly, that's all we need to do. Now, I've got a thing. I like to use the Studio FET a lot because it's really noisy and it gives loads of extra vibe. However, this track's got loads of vinyl samples and bits in it already. It's kind of already gritty. I'd rather use the Platinum Digital and keep it as clean as possible. If you're looking for a bit of flavor, the Studio FET's by far my favorite in Logic. Okay, so we're probably thinking now, right, we come to the limiter and we crush it. No, not at all. We want to do something very, very different at this point. This is where our loudness meter is really going to come in. And there's a whole separate video about why we need to use LUFS metering and why we're going to set this to -14. And I'll link that below so we can cut sort of 20 minutes out of this video if you want to dive into it. But what we do, we set it to 14. And what we need to do here is measure our integrated LUFS. Now, if I was to just start measuring our LUFS on the loudest section here, we do start and we let that roll. Yeah, very quickly we're going to reach our goal. Yeah, see, we're around -17, okay? However, if we take the intro into account, our integrated LUFS over that period of time are actually going to be much, much less. And that's why it's really important that we measure our integrated LUFS across the whole portion of the track. So we saw there, we got about halfway in and we're at sort of -17. Let me just show you the absolute difference of having the quieter intro in and where that measurement would then land. So as you can see there, I've let it run right the way through. And we're at -19 LUFS, a huge difference. So the important thing to note here is you need to reference your entire track, right? And then get your overall integrated LUFS. Then we're going to look at limiting. So to save me about 30 minutes of listening through the track and doing this over and over, we're just going to use the start section, but you need to reference your entire track and get your integrated measurements that way. Okay. Now we're going to bring the limiter into play. Some key things we need to have on here. I leave this in precision mode for this kind of work. You can put it on legacy if you want for whatever reason. True peak detection is going to be on. Again, with the videos below, but there is a video I've done around limiting and why true peak is so important, especially going over to digital and streaming formats. Simply leave true peak on, all right? Your output level, we're going to take this to -1 dB. Yes, that does mean our maximum level is going to be -1 dB. And that is important for the downsampling stage because we're going to downsample this to CD quality, 44.1, 16-bit. And that's then going to go as low as 128 kbps on something like SoundCloud. We need that extra headroom for those calculations to happen and mistakes to happen. All right, that's why we leave that extra bit of headroom for this kind of scenario in mastering. If you go into CD, you can get away with all the way at sort of 0.3, and sometimes you'll even see 0.1. We need a decibel of headroom. Now we're going to gain up depending on our integrated LUFS. -14 is going to be a pretty solid target. We've got a fair bit of headroom. Remember, we only had -17 on the louder section, but when we've done the track like this, we've got more room to work with. So I can realistically add as much as 5 dB now. And when we do this again, we'll hopefully see that we're around that right kind of area. Now, you'll see the integrated LUFS here gradually climbing over time. And it's possible that in this section, it will exceed the -14 dB. Now, that doesn't mean that we then need to reduce our gain, because as the track progresses, and later when there's a breakdown, our integrated LUFS will then reduce down again, probably back below the -14. So we need to measure the entire track, as we've got this nice long breakdown up here and a really long breakdown intro as well that might save us. So here we're getting closer, about halfway, to pushing past that -14. And you see it's creeping up by 0.1, every couple of bars now. It's really sort of right around that right area. And we're just getting there now towards the end of this main section here. And there we go, we're right at it. Might exceed it. Let's have a look. We've got a little bit of yellow above. We're less than 0.1 above. There we go. So we've exceeded our -14 limit, which is the guideline for something like Spotify, right? However, now we're going to go into a breakdown section, and we'll see that that recovers quite quickly. And there we go, we're back at it. So you need to measure the entire track, and you're aiming to have your average finish right around there, all right? If it's at 0.1, 0.2 over, that's absolutely fine, really. You're just aiming for that. It's the recommended guide, but you need to measure the whole track and do it that way. Hope that really makes sense. So once we've done that and you've nailed your integrated LUFS at -14, which I conveniently stopped at there, now we need to export our track. So simple. Let's make sure everything is soloed. We're all on this track. We don't want to put our reference in there as well. We can click and select the whole track, press U. It's going to put a beautiful loop around it. If we press Command and B, we're going to have our bounce menus up. So we need to stick with PCM. We want it to be that initial high quality, right? This time though, our settings are going to have to be a little bit different. So we're sticking with AIF. I always want to stick with the same file format. I don't want to be converting file formats all the time. So if you're working in AIF, stick with AIF. Resolution, this time we're going down to 16-bit. And instead of our sample rate of being 88,200, we are going to go to 44.1. So exactly half. We want to keep our file type as interleaved. We still want it to be a stereo file. Now, dithering, this time we are reducing in quality, so we absolutely need to use dithering. What type do you use? Well, I find for the type of music I do, the noise shaping is the nicest. However, if you've recorded something like it's a really isolated solo acoustic guitar, you might find the noise shaping affects the high end and you can hear like a bit of hiss and things come through. You might be better off with the POW1 dithering. It doesn't do the noise shaping aspect in there. Depending on your type of music, you're going to have to test what's best. I personally use this if I'm doing purely in Logic. Most of the time I'll actually use iZotope's dithering algorithm. We're going to do it offline again because I prefer that, as we've already explored, and we don't want to normalize. We want to maintain that 1 decibel of headroom. So then we're going to export our track. And I would just put it on the desktop and we could call it master stock tutorial like so and bounce. It turns out I pretty much nailed the LUFS. It finished at 13.9 there, which, winner. Yeah, we could just bring in our mastered version of our track. Hopefully, guys, that gives you a much better option for getting your music out on SoundCloud and other places, or if you're really, really happy with the end result, distributing it yourself with DistroKid. Hope the video's been helpful for you guys, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take it easy.